Hi, everybody. It's Adam Ellenboss from Nightlight Astrology. Today is Saturday, October 6th. Venus has just turned retrograde, and today we're going to be taking a look at what happens next. So, at a moment like this, a lot of the times people are, there's been so much buildup, so much anticipation and excitement for Venus retrograde. And as soon as it goes retrograde, sometimes it's a little, anticlimactic. It's like, well, what comes, what do I do now? Or what's going to happen now for the next 40 days as Venus continues to unfold its retrograde cycle. So what I want to talk about today, just briefly, is what to expect from at least the first week or so of Venus's retrograde. There's a lot going on coming up really quickly. So, for example, here's what we'll kind of look at today. So, as all of this is happening, as Venus has just sort of turned retrograde, we're in the dark moon phase. So that's definitely something to think about. How do we kind of contextualize this Venus retrograde within the dark moon? And then you also have just incredible traffic jam of transits coming in the next 4 or 5 days. So, for example, I'll just give you a brief preview. I'm going to try to talk about this somewhat quickly today, but there's so much. So, dark moon, you go to the 8th, 2 days from now, you have a new moon in Libra. And then you get into the 10th, and you have a Mars Venus square, right? Reprised from earlier in September. And then on the 11th, you have, immediately after that, on the 11th, you have a Sun Pluto square. So, think about that just back to back to back. Venus goes retrograde during a dark moon. Then there's a new moon. Then Venus and Mars will square one another. And then the Sun will square Pluto. And, as if that's not enough, I almost forgot. And on the 10th, Mercury is going to be between the 9th and the 10th, entering Scorpio and immediately opposing Uranus. So that's it. Well, let's refresh one more time. Dark moon, Venus turns retrograde. New moon, Venus square Mars, Mercury opposite Uranus, and Sun square Pluto, all between now and the next 5 days. So I guess I'm very thankful. I am going to actually be out of town on a yoga retreat in West Virginia in a tech-free, cell phone-free zone. So I'm actually kind of happy that I'm going to be tuning out of the world for a little bit during this time, to be honest with you. But I wanted to make sure that we talk about all of these things before I left, and give everyone some things to think about. So let's start with this dark moon. So as Venus is turning retrograde, so for many people are obviously in a space right now that's pretty difficult, right? From my clients to the news cycle, and nothing is making us especially happy with the news right now, for most part. I think it's kind of common to wherever people stand in the political spectrum. It's like nothing in the news is super thrilling right now. So, but there's this very deep sense of disappointment, of disillusionment, of letting go of things, of having reached the bottom of the well. So things that you've been drawing on for your internal sense of happiness, peace, the things that you usually go for to satisfy your inner life may not be working anymore. Venus turns retrograde in Scorpio, and in a sense, Venus is related to our desires and to, as Mars is as well, to what makes us happy and how we try to surround ourselves with people and things that are pleasing, and that the kinds of things that we put around us to beautify our life, the kinds of things that we value and hold dear, the kinds of the forms of happiness that we seek in the world. And with Venus turning retrograde in this deep, dark autumnal sign of Scorpio, it's a Mars-ruled sign. It's happening under a dark moon. There's a sense of confrontation with our values, of seeing through the scam. You know what I mean? Like this is no longer working for me, and it seems like a joke. There may be even some bitterness involved, because this is dark moon time is when we reach the deepest and darkest stage of decomposition. And as Venus is turning retrograde in Mars's sign, that's kind of confrontational, and it can just make you feel a little bit more bitter and ready for the change. Just kind of like, I'm done. But it can be deeply internal as well. The dark moon is, to me, almost like the dream state. When you, if you've ever had a night where you're trying to sleep, and all night long you're kind of sleeping, but you're also kind of aware that you're not sleeping. You're dreaming, but you can't seem to drop past into the dreamless state of sleep, or the less lucid form of sleep, so that you feel like you're getting real rest. So right now is kind of a similar time. Dark moon, with such powerful events happening simultaneously, it's hard to really drop down deeply into that sense of surrender, forgiveness, relaxation, release. It's just a little harder than usual, because the other energies in the sky aren't necessarily letting us do that so easily. So, it's a restless time. It's a kind of prophetic time. The dreams that come, the images and visions that we receive, this kind of metaphorical moment, they open our eyes to things that need to change, but they don't exactly let us rest. There's something about prophets. Traditionally, they're always sort of weary. They see the future, they see the trends and where they're going, especially if we sort of don't change our ways. Usually a prophet has a way of warning us against the way that things will tend to decline and yield disastrous consequences or results if we don't make a change. And that feeling is kind of in the air right now. It could be subtle. It may be not a huge deal. It may be about small things in your life, but there's still the feeling like, I better do something about this. So, and the worry, the anxiety that's there, the sense that something is about to crop up. I've even had, more than usual in the past week, I've had people saying, it feels like something bad is about to happen. And I've just said, it's not necessarily that something bad is going to happen, as much as it is that there's a certain kind of anxiety that accompanies this kind of moment. It's the anxiety that accompanies change. When you know change is coming, you don't exactly know what it's going to look like. Almost always the anxiety is worse than the actual change itself. And whatever that change may be for us individually right now, again, you think of Venus-related things. So you think of the things that are changing in our relationships, the things that are changing about what we value, what we seek for happiness. There's a book I was reading on Vedic Cosmology just a few days ago. And I'm trying to remember the book title now. Yeah, I have it right here. A very interesting book called 6 Causes, The Vedic Theory of Creation. It's a very interesting book, and I've been getting to know more about Vedic cosmology and Vedic astrology. So it's been fascinating to read and see the similarities between ancient Western Greek Hellenistic astrologers and Indian astrologers. But one thing that he said was that part of what the planets signify is they're like the hands of a cosmic clock that's always ticking, and as it ticks, the sort of the planets representing the hands of the clock. We see all different kinds of changes in the material world unfolding, but behind all of these changes, what drives all of the changes? And in Vedic cosmology, it's said that our desires are what drive the changes. The desires of innumerable, sentient beings that have wants and needs and desires. And where do all those desires come from? And again, in Vedic cosmology, they come from the feeling of incompleteness, that something is missing, that not everything is well. There's a kind of restlessness. I watched this, all the time with my little daughter, who, if she's around the TV for too long at all, very quickly afterward, she loses patience for anything that's not, fast moving like the TV is. Even if she watches some show that's pretty healthy, what's next? Do I have to do this? Can we go? Can we do, so it's this restlessness. But that restlessness is, sometimes we blame it on the TV, or we say it's technology, or there's a lot of things to blame it on. But I found over time, especially both my wife and I, having a yoga studio and just meeting and talking with lots of people, observing our own lives, things that our teachers have told us, that there's really no end to the different permutations of our desires and all the different things that we try to fill ourselves with to reach some sense of completeness. We constantly are restless because of this. One of my teachers always says that the heart is like seeking a signal, like a phone or something that's seeking a Wi-Fi signal. The heart is always seeking a signal to attach to. And in yoga, of course, the word yoga means union, or to link, or to bond, or to bind. And the idea of spiritual life on some level is to yoke our hearts to a signal that is in some ways transcendental. It's here, but it's elsewhere. So that we don't have to get lost in being identified with the constantly ticking of the karmic clocks. So the planets are our friends, but they're also potentially our enemies, just like the mind is potentially a friend or potentially an enemy. Why am I saying all of this? Because right now, it's a really great time to, when you're going through a retrograde period, oftentimes, especially with a big lineup of planetary dynamics that are about to unfold, which we'll talk about in a minute, it's very easy to see the astrology at hand when there's so much. Two things. One, it's very easy to see the astrology at hand because it's very dramatic. It's more like the grand finale of a fireworks show. When you got a bunch of transits lined up, it's like, for a short period of time, my readership, for example, on my posts will spike to, thousands of clicks or whatever, whereas it might go down significantly if it's a more mundane transit. It's not in the middle of eclipse season, a planet isn't entering a new sign, it's not a new moon or a full moon. It's predictable when my own readership will go up. And it's usually around the times when there's lots of astrology happening and more people are likely to be feeling it or to be looking for some sort of cosmic guidance, right? So that happens. And in a sense, so astrology is really helpful for helping us make sense of what's happening. But also, the hidden benefit of such times is not so much what the astrology tells us or that it validates our experiences or whatever, but it's that it also helps us remember there are indeed these hands of a karmic clock that are just ticking in the sky, that all of the changes that we go through in the world, when there's so many transits like this in a row, you have the ability to see the difference between the kind of the opera of life that's like unfolding, and you as a spirit soul that is going through it, but is also fundamentally different and detached from all of it. So that difference between the spirit soul and the karmic changes of the material world happening around us are really clear when lots of astrological transits are happening, like back to back to back. So I always try to mention that before just, going into everything. Venus retrogrades are in many ways about reconfiguring what we desire, what we're looking for, what's going to make us happy, what's going to bring us a sense of fulfillment. But if we're like any transit, if all we're doing is messing around with the externals and we haven't found a real signal for our heart to connect to bond with, and we haven't built a life around that, so that all that we're, hearing and doing and a good chunk of our day is not spent staying in the vibration of that linkage, that connection to something divine that we have a relationship with, that we are a part of, then it doesn't matter what kinds of external changes are happening. It doesn't matter how many astrology transits are happening and what big crazy changes are happening around us. There'll be more. There'll be some next month to write about. There'll be another horoscope column next month to write about. There'll be eclipses. There'll be, so many things. It's a very elaborate clock in the sky with lots of things going on. We can always talk about it. But if part of the process of any of these things isn't about figuring out that who you are needs a signal that goes beyond these constant permutations and changes and flux, then it will have been for nothing. It truly will be fruitless. So that being said, during this Venus retrograde, again, there may need to be changes in relationships, changes in what pleases you, what makes you happy. There could be a sense of anxiety in the air right now with this dark moon and this feeling that, things are deteriorating and there's some sense of disillusionment, some change on the horizon. But take a moment at some point, just stand back and remember that, wow, like so much of what I call my life is reflected in this kind of unfolding, constant, never-ending drama of the cosmic clocks. And when you get that feeling, then suddenly what you're looking for and how you interact will shift. For example, I'll just give you a simple one. So with Venus is retrograde right now, and it has a configuration in my own chart that's related to the fourth house, which is a house of home, property, etc. So in a water sign like Scorpio, I suddenly felt the urge to look into redoing our bathrooms, because there's probably some water problems within their old tubs and stuff like that. So I thought, I'm going to get an estimate and see what it's up, see what would be happening there, how much it would cost. The guy came out and gave an estimate, and I was deeply compelled to spend money to make these changes, like right now, like really impulsively. And the guy too wanted me to sign like a contract right when he was there, and he was really charismatic about how these changes were really going to help the value of our house, like all this stuff, And I said, well, thankfully my wife is not here. I need, I need to talk to her about it. We make our decisions together. So, I'll have to get back to you. And he was really like, no, you should make it now. You should make it now. And as I was talking to him and explaining I can't make a decision without my wife, I realized this man is tempting me to betray the trust of my wife right now and make a huge financial decision without her presence, right? So this is Venus retrograde in Scorpio, this moment where I'm being pressured to spend a lot of money without the presence of my partner to make a decision, and it's about water-related damage maybe to one of the bathrooms or whatever. And all of a sudden, in the midst of this conversation, I just realized like how completely blind am I to the astrology of the moment, right? And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And then I just looked at the guy and I said, I just can't do it. I looked him really in the face and I said, I would be betraying my wife. And he just kind of was like it was like he had to snap out of his consumerist sales pitch mode and be human with me for a second. And he was very uncomfortable with it. So there's a Venus retrograde moment for sure right away, right? It's Venus in a Mars ruled sign. It was kind of confrontational. It was uncomfortable. He wasn't trying to be a jerk. He was, he was a very nice sales guy or whatever, but that's what it got down to. So anyway, that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about, where there's a kind of spiritual decision that has to be made. Excuse me. Where I could easily just get lost and identified with the unfolding of the karmic clocks. They can be my enemy. Or I can remember that what's really bringing me happiness has nothing to do with the water or needing to fix a tub or anything like that. It has to do with a deeper sense of fulfillment and contentment. But I can easily get lost, right? So that's what the planets are always up to. So you could remember that right now. It'll be very helpful, because not only are we in the sort of mix of this Venus retrograde, but we're also about to hit a period of time where there's going to be a lot of transits back to back to back. I see someone ask the question, is it weird that I feel so great? No, you should always feel great. And in fact, the goal of all astrology in some ways is to help us find transcendental happiness. So astrology, a lot of the times astrologers speak in generalities. Like an astrologer will say, everyone's feeling like this or everyone's feeling like that. And someone's always like, well, I don't, I feel amazing. And I'm always like, good, that's great. Because what you're often talking about is the way in which when the drama's unfolding in a very predictable manner, it's like a movie theater, right? At the predictable parts in the movie where the music gets in a certain mood or elevates or goes down and gets dark and scary, like everyone's emotions ride those waves. Like that's what most of us do. Just like my bathtub example, I'm just like on the Venus retrograde wave, like ready to sign a contract and just betray my wife, okay, so, but a lot of us who are either rebellious and defiant can be a good quality, or who have our own reflective capacity, or who are aware of influences because we have spiritual practice or we've cultivated some level of reflective distancing in past lives, maybe. Whatever, we might be in a circumstance where we aren't as pushed around by those things. But there's always times when we are. I don't know. Like most people, you can look at their charts and you can be like, I don't care how, amazing, what kind of amazing like yoga or Buddhist muscles you have or whatever. There's going to be a time where, transits are going to come along that knock you off your center. And it's extra important to use astrology as preparatory. That's what all of the ancient astrologers tell us. So in that sense, there's always this in some ways, astrology isn't just like, oh, this is how you're going to be feeling, this is what's going to be happening. This is what could be happening. And so, use your intelligence. So very good question. Thank you, Jennifer. And Jennifer says, I also had a moment of temptation like that recently. Yeah. Someone else says I was accused of betrayal. Yeah. So, all right, well, let's talk about the transits to come. So dark moon right now, a little heavy. You should start to feel a sense of, I'm ready to make the changes. I'm ready to roll forward with this revision of Venus retrograde starting on the new moon on October 8th. It's a Venus-ruled new moon in Libra. So that feeling of the new moon renewal is here. This Venus retrograde is very heavy and in a sense a little dark, because it's happening in what we call through a portion of the zodiac that was traditionally called the Via Combusta. Sometimes people mark it from about 15 Libra through about 15 Scorpio. And it was called the fiery road, or the burnt road, or the singed path. And it has a relation to all sorts of interesting things. For example, these are things that I heard from a lecture that I listened to about the Via Combusta at UAC in Chicago. It was a very interesting talk, and I'm trying to remember who gave it, but I can't now. So if someone does, please pop her name in. But she was talking about this portion of the sky around these constellations of stars and stuff were traditionally related to the great floods. Many places around the world, this portion of the sky is related to the great floods that come and ruin or destroy the earth, but also is part of the rebirth story of the earth. So the death and rebirth motif with the great floods. You also have some connection to this portion of the zodiac being the bridge across which the spirits of the departed travel. This is why we celebrate the dead, the Day of the Saints, the Dia de los Muertos, or whatever it's called, and All Saints Day and things like this. It's an auspicious time also, if I'm remembering this correctly, it's Kartik. I can't remember. There's a very auspicious month in Vedic cosmology as well, in the Indian sort of calendar, for receiving deep healing and forgiveness. It's an auspicious time. However, both of the luminaries find their falls in Libra and Scorpio. So the sun is in its fall, the fall season in Libra, and the moon is in its fall in Scorpio. Both places where the light is really diminished. And so it's that, it's a deep, it's a deeper retrograde. Well, right out the gates, there's going to be this feeling of like, okay, I'm ready to make changes. It's a new day. I'm ready to start things off on a new foot. But then right away you have Venus at the new moon on the 8th. It'll be like that. And then right away on the 10th, Venus square Mars. The masculine feminine dynamics are getting into a sort of face off with one another right away. So when they face off, there's sexual and creative tension in relationships. There's struggles with diplomacy, agreements, coming to agreements, breaking out of agreements, the kinds of confrontations that you have to have in relationships where there are serious value conflicts of interest. There can be, mounting tension, especially from Venus is in what we call the superior square to Mars, which means Venus is sort of exerting a pressure on Mars. Mars is hurling a ray backward and striking Venus. So there's a real sort of grudge match going on between the two of them right now. For example, as evidenced in the entire, civic discourse in the United States right now, with the Supreme Court nominee, the Me Too movement, etc. There's a back and forth that's happening. It's pretty, it's pretty intense. But we see that in our individual lives as the part of us that is more receptive or yin-like, and the part of us that's more active or yang-like. So you could say the masculine and feminine within each of us is figuring out something. So for example, if you're trying to figure out how to be more assertive, but you accidentally step on somebody's toes, okay, well then you have some inner calibrating to do to figure it out, right? That's just a simple example. But when Venus and Mars, or on the other hand, you're not being assertive enough, you're being too nice, and the niceness that you're falling into is weak and leads to you getting walked on, or it leads to some level of inauthenticity or falseness. You end up gossiping about someone behind their back because you can't talk to them to their face about it, and it makes it a much bigger deal than it would have been because now it's gossip and it's gotten out and whatever. So the passive and the active, the assertive and the more receptive, those qualities right now are, they're really trying to move into the right balance. If you're in relationships that are healthy and you're not straining or struggling with things, it can be a time of creative tension where there's, it's like that moment when, girl meets guy, guy meets girl, or whatever, two people meet and there's sparks and there's chemistry and there's passion and there's anxiety and there's a little bit of risk. And so Venus Mars can just represent the sexual tension or creative tension in a very positive way, but it's not something that it doesn't resolve easily. There's some work that has to be done on both sides. Compromise is a good word for the next 5-6 days, because a lot of times what happens when planets square off is very, especially in fixed signs like Scorpio and Aquarius, is there's a war or a battle of principles, my principle, your principle, like that. So you're going to watch for that. That's on the 10th. At the same time, Mercury is opposite Uranus. Amazing sort of mentally enlivening transit. Mercury, of course, the messenger, related to interpretation, communication, the mind, thinking, speaking, writing, anything from singing and songwriting with Mercury sometimes to, studying code. So Mercury, though, this very mental, communicative archetype, moving into an opposition with Uranus, the rebel, the disruptor, the innovator, the dissident, the eccentric, the wayward, the restless. So there's this incredibly sort of potential for the kinds of information, news, announcements that kind of burst into public in the world to be really dramatic around the 10th, 11th. But then also for there to be a more erratic and eccentric and inventive energy, mentally or communicatively. You want to be very careful of sort of saying your idea out loud before you've had time to process it and figure out the best way to actually communicate it to people so that maybe more people will get on board. Why? Because remember, Venus and Mars are square at the same time. So whatever like really inventive, original ideas or thinking or communication is coming through around the 10th, just remember that Venus is square Mars. So the temptation to make your interesting idea part of a conflict that may have nothing to do with the quality of your idea is important, because you could sabotage a really great idea by somehow inserting it at an ill-timed moment, or making it a part of a conflict rather than sort of giving it the for example, if you're having tension at work with your boss and you simultaneously have a great idea that you come up with, your boss may actually like the idea if you present it at a later time outside of the context of whatever tension you're dealing with on some other project. Simple idea, right? But on the other hand, there might be, within the context of some tension in a relationship, there might be kind of a breakthrough in thinking or communicating that needs to happen. And that could also be a very positive thing. So just look for that kind of Uranian mental archetype, very dynamic, rebellious, original, but sometimes foot and mouth syndrome goes with it. At the same time that Venus and Mars are squaring, some relational or creative sexual tension all around the 10th. It's just after the new moon. I mean, this is just as the moon is like showing up. And as the moon is showing up for the first time, by the way, it's going to be in Scorpio. So this stuff is going to be deep and pretty charged. Mercury is going to be in Scorpio opposite Uranus and Taurus. The level of like, let's keep the peace versus let's punch it out right now, that kind of tension is going to be palpable. And then on the 11th, last but not least, the sun will square Pluto. So again, as if all of this isn't enough already, then on the 11th, the sun squares Pluto. And there you have death and rebirth themes with Pluto in relation to solar figures, paternal figures, leaders, CEOs, kings, queens, so that whoever is kind of the head will go through some death and rebirth, or the relation to power, corruption, and those who are, at the top will be more pronounced. On the other hand, the sun is our understanding. The sun is related to illumination, clarity, enlightenment, insight, truth. And so sun square Pluto is an opportunity for revelation, for real insight, and for a total transformation of how we think about and view something. With the sun in Libra, the ability for a kind of an insight into justice, fairness, equality, harmony, balance. It's a deep level of insight, but it's kind of that, I almost want to say it's a killing level of insight. It has the ability to just be like, oh wow, that got me. Humbling, maybe takes us off our high horse, levels the scales. There's some karma maybe to, we reap what's been sown, but the gift is the feeling of things being back to equal, and of there being a sense of forgiveness, and perhaps the kind of insight that somehow brings us back into harmony with something in our lives that's been off or tilted in the wrong way. So that's going to be really strong around the 11th. Pluto square the sun is also about the themes of power and disempowerment, especially, and with those scales focused right now, so much going on with legality, the law, fairness, justice, truth. So it's a heavy and deep time for those issues right now. Hence the Venus retrograde in Scorpio, ruling over a new moon in the sign of the scales. There's a lot of questions about justice for many people right now. Here's something I know for some people this is going to be very cliched and not acceptable, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's something that I believe in very deeply, which is that on the human level of things, things are not fair and they're not equal, right? So the idea, the image of Libra gives us this sense of the ideal, the perfect balance, and those are ideals that we try to bring into the world. There's an ideal standard of fairness and justice that we try to bring into the world, and we should. We should be seekers of justice. However, the world its nature is not ever in balance. The scales are always going back and forth. The seasons, the light goes up, then the light goes down. So the scales, the equinox is a kind of ideal moment, but it's a fleeting moment in the naturalness of the material world. The equinox moments are equality between light and dark, very rare, very kind of perfect, but very fleeting moment. So when there's unfairness going on around us in the world, this is not to say, well, perfect fairness is sort of idealistic, so let's just let go of that standard. We shouldn't be so idealistic. No, but on the other hand, it's a good reminder that when we fall short of the ideal, when the world falls short of the ideal, or when others cheat us, or we feel that we've been done an injustice on any level, we have to remember that our inherent sense of fairness, justice, truth, dignity, inherent worth and value, those things are always perfectly maintained within the true nature of who we are as spiritual beings. On a spiritual level, no matter what's going up and down in the material world, if we're living a spiritual life, then we can understand these passing changes as not reflective of who we really are or what our real value is. And we can always return to connection with our spirit soul and with the divine whole of which we're a part to find that sense of eternal unity. And that provides us with a sense of peace, tolerance, patience, humility, acceptance, beauty, love, grace. It fills us. And that way we have some sense of hope and trust with us always, that no matter what's happening out here, we can go on laboring for the good while completely accepting whatever the results are. We can also, in a sense, trust that whatever outcomes are currently manifesting in the external world, that they are not what our internal sense of happiness is dependent upon. So that, it's a pretty cliched spiritual teaching, but it's something that I live my life by. I try to set my clock by that value rather than the planets, even though I study the planets and I think that they're very good teachers. So that's what I've got for today. I'm going to look up, see what other questions there are. I've been researching a lot and finally decided what new, expensive, but pretty good computer to buy. Is it a bad time to do it next week? I just needed ASAP for university. Thanks. Not sure. If there's a need and you have to buy something for, your schooling, then it seems like that's the determining factor. But, if you're buying something that's, that's expensive, just for the sake of buying something that's expensive, that will look or feel good or something like that, I would always be careful of that during a Venus retrograde. Yeah. Let's see. I'm hoping for healing in my relationship. The accusation of betrayal was very hurtful. Yeah, well, that's not an easy thing to recover from, and only advice, I guess, would be to, to forgive, and also to, seek understanding. Don't be uncompromising on the level of hurt that you feel, but also you shouldn't sit there and, if someone falsely accuses you of something, you should, you should not tolerate being in a relationship with someone where the trust is not mutual between two people. So that's all I could say about that. It's very easy during Venus retrograde to be very principled and stubborn about our hurts. So, when we're hurt, it's valid. And, a good relationship should try to go both ways to make sure that we love and care for one another. When we hurt one another, we take some responsibility for that. But on the other hand, it's hard to take responsibility if people want to passively sort of punish us for having hurt them, right? So forgiveness has to be authentic, right? So someone says, oh, you really hurt me. And they say, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to, or whatever. And then you go on trying to punish them for having hurt you. A lot of relationships struggle with that. I can't tell you how often I deal with, people coming for readings, going through things in their relationships. And in some ways, it's like we're so hurt about having been hurt. And that can get all of us in trouble. And, me too. And being hurt about being hurt in some ways is understandable if there's real trauma. There's real heavy trauma, doesn't go away right away. But for a lot of stuff that we deal with in our everyday relationships, we teach ourselves to be resilient and forgiving, and we lead others by example when we, recover quickly and forgive easily when people sincerely ask for forgiveness. So Leslie says, I'm supposed to have a surgery in the next month on my parathyroid. Is that something I should try to wait? Boy, that's a big question. I'm not super confident answering that one because I'm not a medical astrologer. I could only just say that retrogrades are not inherently bad times for anything. It's very specific. The retrogrades as a general significator also pertain to a wide variety of things. So what to speak of a very specific situation with a very specific body part and very specific timelines. Speaking to a horary medical astrologer or someone like that would probably be the best way to ask that question. Let's see, I'm going up and seeing if there's any more questions. Yeah, I think that's it. So that's what I've got for today, everyone. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and the next 5 days, again, hang in there. Remember, try to have that moment where things are unfolding. If you're getting caught in a bunch of pretty wild dynamics, or if you're getting caught up in the collective stuff happening in the news and it's taking you emotionally and mentally, step back and be like, wow, go back to those archetypes, see the cosmic clock ticking its hands and be like, wow, that's amazing. And yet in that moment, recognize the distance you have from it and ask yourself, who is that? Who is that has this reflective distance? That's your spirit soul. And whatever you can do to stay in touch with that, to kindle the life of that spirit soul within you, do it, because that's where our real happiness lies. Okay, guys, have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you again soon.